Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Looking forward to talking to you about adaptive selling during the course of the next half an hour. Don't know how much you know about adaptive selling, but it was born about 30, 40 years ago just on the basis that people needed to adapt their selling style according to the customer in front of them. But it's taken on real relevance nowadays because, of course, we know so much about this thing that sits inside our heads in terms of our knowledge of neuroscience and how people engage, how people make decisions, how people solve problems. We now know so much about that it's become more of a science. So we can actually teach people the rules of engagement, if you like, in terms of relationship selling. So the first thing I'd like to say before we go any further is whatever you might read from perhaps some other solutions that are here in the marketplace, relationship selling is live and kicking. Certainly isn't dead by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the reasons why it's so powerful is because differentiation is becoming an incredibly scarce resource. It was only a couple of weeks ago that Apple gave a set of results with their results slowing down, going backwards in terms of their iPhone sales. And that's because their competitors are much more agile nowadays, and it's the same in every marketplace. Differentiation is getting scarcer, and the time scale by which you have it is diminishing all of the time. But the one true differentiation that you have is your salespeople and the people themselves, and how they engage with your customers. And that can be your true differentiation. Things are moving so fast that it's the one thing that can make a difference in the way that your business sells. The solution, therefore, is right in front of you. It's your people. It's as simple as that. But you need to leverage it by learning the rules of engagement, by learning about how to do those things. There was a model developed by somebody called Professor Wood from Virginia University. And he talked in terms of expertise, credibility, and compatibility. We all know you need to understand your product and service. That's the expertise bit. You need to have knowledge. You need to have credibility. That's about experience, track record. It's about doing what you say you're going to do and all of those sorts of things. But the missing ingredient in lots of ways can be this compatibility piece. But you can make it work if you understand the science behind the art of relationship building. Seems strange to say that because I think most people believe that relationship selling or relationship building is an art. Isn't it something that's inside our DNA? Well, the reality is we can teach it. We can teach people to be better at it. So we all know people buy people. You've heard that phrase a lot, people buy people they like. It's a cliche, but I don't know what you find. Most cliches are actually based on truth. It's a truism. People do buy from people they like. And therefore it's your responsibility to get you or your sales teams to adopt the principles of adaptive selling. Despite rumours to the contrary, it's not dead. Relationship selling, for me, is the one thing that makes a difference to your business. We can teach people to better relationship builders, to create compatibility. And it is based on this foundation of neuroscience. Now, I don't know if you've ever came across that quote last year. You know, if you don't know your prefrontal cortex from your parietal lobe, you're missing out on things nowadays. Yeah, that knowledge gives you expertise, that gives you differentiation. So learn about it. Most large organizations now are realizing that neuroscience and our knowledge about how the brain works is one of the most powerful tools that we now have. We know more about what's happened inside the brain in the last 10 years than we've found out in the whole of history combined. It's huge. We know how people engage with each other. We know how people relate to each other. We know how they make decisions. We know how they problem solve. And if you can tap into that, it's incredibly powerful. And adaptive selling is the tool to be able to adapt into that. Lots of facts. I'm not going to bore you with all of those. You can read some of them yourselves. This is the development within neuroscience as we know it. People used to talk about left brain, right brain. Nobody talks about that anymore. It's proven to be wrong. Yeah. In 2015, the world's fourth largest computer took 40 seconds to do what the brain does in a second. Staggering in terms of the facts. But even more staggering is that 95% of what you do, you're doing subconsciously. Your brain's activity is only 5% in the consciousness. And what we're talking about in adaptive selling is tapping into that 95%, is to understand what's happening behind the scenes when people are thinking and engaging and thinking about you. We all know the rules, probably you've come across. Some psychologists agree that it takes 7 seconds to make your mind up about somebody. Some people say it's 3. Your brain is going through thousands of computations to understand whether I connect with you or not. Now, are you friend or foe? Are you a form of sustenance? And only then does your emotional brain, the body language, kick in, and only after that does the rational brain kick in. Those first few seconds are critical, and we can teach people to be better in those first few seconds. And I'm going to give you some examples as we go through this in terms of how we can do that. Some of the developments have understood around the area. People come across the terminology in terms of mirror neurons. A lot of it is monkey do, monkey say, replicate the behavior. But we now know how these work in some level of detail. So again, we can tap into that. We can tap into the emotional state of somebody. By engaging and adapting slightly differently, we can actually fool the person in front of us about our behavior if we act in a slightly different way, and the brain collects a positive impression of somebody. So we can actually use it in a very positive way to connect with our customers, connect with our colleagues. When you're doing a pipeline review with your manager, you may even connect better with them in order to be able to substantiate the results that you've got. So it's a huge development that we need to tap into. Now, there are lots of organizations out there that use, because the first part of this process for me is using behavioral profiling. I talked about behavioral profiling. So many of you will have used behavioral profiling psychometric tools as part of the recruitment stage in order to select people. But actually those were all developed primarily as a developmental tool. And this is what you really need to tap into. The reassuring thing is whether you deal with Prism Brain Mapping, Thomas International, SHL, Myers-Briggs, Social Styles Matrix, and the one that I choose to utilize, Life Orientations, they actually all say the same thing. Yeah, that's the reassuring part, is virtually all of them agree that we all have 4 behavioral styles and orientations. But we have ones which we prefer to use, and we have ones which we will often neglect. What you need to be able to do is first understand your own profile, and then to be able to observe and classify the profile of your customers and use that information in order to be able to sell more effectively. So what do I mean by a behavioral profile? It's as simple as this. It's your window on the world. As we all grow up, you'll have heard lots of psychologists talk about nature, nurture, all of those sorts of things. As we all grow up, we develop a behavioral style, which is based on what sort of works for us. Some people, it's all about people and relationships. Other people, it's all about the facts and the data. Other people, it's all about the quality of what they do. But behavioral profiling all agree that it summarizes your values, your goals, your attitudes, your behaviors. And if you connect with somebody on the same level as them, they're more likely to buy from you. So you need to be able to connect more effectively. I love this building. This building graphically demonstrates for me what behavioral profiling is all about. And you may think, what's he on about? It's a building. Well, it's a building in called La Rotonda in Italy. And this building, as you can imagine, is not only symmetrical on these two sides, it's completely symmetrical all the way around. If you and I all worked inside this building, we would all have, depending on which window we looked out of, which orientation we preferred, a completely different perspective on life. What you consider to be important to you is not what's important to roughly three quarters of the rest of the population. So you need to be sitting there, and when I talk to salespeople, I say, whose window are you looking out of? Are you looking out of your own? Are you treating everybody based on your own values? Or are you actually treating them how they want to be treated? And it goes way back. Anybody remember this film? To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus Finch, one of the great black and white movies. You know, and you go back that far, and a story about a local lawyer who defended something in the times of the Deep South in America. And he talked about walking around in somebody else's shoes. Walk around in their skin and walk around in their shoes. And that's what salespeople need to do. But more than that, they need to understand the behavioural profile of the people that they're talking to. And there are ways to do that. The communication dilemma. How many times have you heard people say, do you know what, I like to treat other people the way I like to be treated? Sorry, it's completely wrong. And I know if you go back to the Bible, Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, if I remember it right, do unto others as they would do unto you. I'm sorry, it's not great advice. He didn't have the advice of psychologists at that point in time. Instead, it should be, in fact, other people want to be treated the way that they want to be treated. They have different values to you and you and you. And only when you understand them can you connect better. And you get a more natural connection when you adapt to their style. But how do we know that when we're not them? Well, there are rules of engagement, as I talked about. You can observe people. You can look at it in lots of ways. So how do we unlock that power? Let's get to some detail in terms of how we can do it. So, first thing we do, before you start to observe other people and say, what's your profile and how can I adapt to you, you first need to understand your own profile. So undertake a behavioural or psychometric profile. Learn to understand what your style is, what your preferences are. You will find it very easy to relate to people who are very similar to you. You will struggle to relate to people who are completely different to you. So we need to learn how to do that. But the first stage is this self-awareness. Really understand your own way of working and what's important to you. Only then should you think about observing other people and starting to classify them. And what I mean by that is become people watchers in everything that you do. I do it all of the time. Whenever I meet somebody, I'm thinking of what's their orientation, what's their behavioural style. I do it with politicians on the TV, I do it with people I meet, I do it with customers, prospects, everyone I meet. It provides a framework of understanding. And only then, once you've connected and understood what that profile is, can you truly adapt to their style by doing things differently. So now this is using my life orientations tool. If you use other tools, that's absolutely fine, because they pretty much say all the same thing. This is what LIFO calls their circumplex diagram. Really powerful diagram to demonstrate how different we are. Now, first thing to remember is don't put yourself in a box. Don't put yourself in one quadrant, because we're all a blend of all of them, but we tend to use some more than others. So over the top right here, you've got what we call adapting people. It's all about the relationship. It's about being resourceful and flexible. And if you treat other people and think about how they're feeling, you get what you want in the end. But it's all this resourceful, flexibility, enthusiastic. These are the people that can walk into a networking event and talk to anybody. Yeah? Talk to anybody. I don't know if you realise that, how fearful that is for most people, standing up and talking. Fortunately, I'm not one of those people. I don't know if you knew that the fear of public speaking is the #1 fear in the world, even above dying. Even above dying, proven by research. That's adapting. Controlling is probably the easiest one that people can pick out, because these are the people that are assertive, confident, driving, forceful, always about achieving goals. They drive their organisation and their own competence forward. So they're quick to act, they're competent, they're forceful, they like focusing on things, focus on tasks. So you'll all have seen people like that. People in the pie. Go back far enough to know, well, was Margaret Thatcher controlling? Yeah, probably. Is Lord Sugar from today a bit controlling? Yeah. but they still all have elements of the others. You know, one of the powerful things about Lord Sugar is that his people who work for him will follow him to the ends of the earth. So he's got lots of the others in terms of the people skills as well. Supporting, all about achieving a quality result. If you do a job well, you've got to do it to the highest possible quality, but you do it in a spirit of teamwork, in terms of trust. You must trust the people that you work for, and you should get rewarded just by the fact that you do a good job yourself. And then down at the bottom left-hand corner, you've got what's called conserving behaviour. Conserving is all about those people who are rational, analytical, data-driven. They don't do anything without having proven the results, without having understood the evidence of where it's worked before, considered all of the options. Make sure they don't make mistakes because they've studied the objective data. It's all about rational data. Now you can see by the words around the outside of the circumflex how different people are. Up here extrovert, bottom left introvert. Big picture people on the right hand side, detailed analytical people on the left hand side. The people that adapting people, often reminiscent of a lot of salespeople, great relationship builders struggle with, conserving. Unless they relate effectively, they run the risk of alienating 25% of their prospects. Now, nobody can afford to write off 25% of their prospects. You need to do it better and more carefully. Similarly, supporting people will struggle with controlling. You can see the colours blend into each other. That's important. So you have more in common with an orientation next to you than you do with one diametrically opposite. So everybody agrees that these are the 4 behavioural styles, but how do you use that knowledge? So this is how you use it. You learn to confirm and understand your own profile, capitalise on your strengths, moderate your excesses. One of the things that LIFO teaches is that most of our weaknesses come from overplaying our strengths. That actually when we're heavily controlling, we may be positively assertive and confident and dynamic, but when we use it to excess, we become aggressive. We become domineering as opposed to dominant. We push things too far. And actually, instead of using the same behavior more, we should rein it back. We should moderate it when we get under pressure. We then talk about developing the styles that you neglect. And this is a great matrix and way to develop your own style. We then talk about bridging, which is the adapting piece. How do you bridge to other people? How do you know they're a different style, and what do you do? And if all else fails, go find somebody who can help you, who can supplement you, somebody who's good at it, that particular orientation, and use them as a role model for you to improve your behavior. Sales strengths and excesses. So nobody would argue there are strengths in all of the different elements there. But the excesses can be really quite damaging. Let's take one as an example. All of this information is in your packs, by the way. There's cards on there. So if you took controlling, wouldn't you want salespeople who are focused on closing the sale, want to get to decision makers, make things happen quickly, can close deals down, are a tough negotiator? Of course you would. But how about people who are dismissive of other people's ideas when they overplay it, when they sacrifice thought for action? They don't think things through properly enough. They're so driven that they don't think through and they don't listen to other people. Those are excesses which they need to moderate. So it's a great model to understand where you can go wrong depending upon your operating style, your behavioural style. So we need to adapt, and we can do it at every stage of the sale. So let's look at these in quickly. Even when prospecting, you can look at somebody's LinkedIn profile and pretty much tell what profile they're going to be before you meet them. So you're prepared how to work, how to adapt accordingly. Their headline will tell you something about how they see themselves. The number of connections will tell you something. Their photograph, this is how they like to be seen. Their summary, what they say about, will tell you clues about their orientation. Who they endorse, what they say about other people is what they admire. What people say about them tells you lots of clues. The language that they use. So even before you meet somebody, you can be prepared to adapt. And it will influence your prospecting style. Adapting people, I'd go to networking events. You know, conserving people need to see detail and analysis. Send them some pure detail in terms of what your service is all about. They'll want to review it. So there are rules of engagement at every time. There are simple clues how to observe just walking into somebody's office. We were all taught that as young salespeople. Look for the clues in the office. They'll tell you about what orientation they are. Yeah? Not 100% true all of the time, but they're great indicators of exactly what the profile is likely to be. So use that information. Subconsciously put it into your brain. Then their body language will tell you. Different descriptors of different body language. Their energy levels, if they're enthusiastic, or if they're closed and introverted, or if they're very warm and softly spoken, will tell you what orientation they are. And only then can you adapt. What they say, their communication style, how softly spoken, or they straight in, direct to the point. These tell you what orientation people are. The words that they use. It's very simple. If I'm talking to conserving people, I talk about, Mr. Prospect, let's sit down and actually take this step by step. You'll want to understand the detail around this and what options you've got and where we've done it before. I understand that. And you'll need to think that through before you come to a decision. That is a huge way in terms of adapting to that person. Suddenly you're on their wavelength. Observe people every day. We've got a great example in our European referendum. Get better at it. Look at them. As it happens, these four, completely different. Mr. Cameron, conserving. Be cautious, stay where we are, let's not take any risks. Boris, bit extrovert, bit dynamic, a lot of controlling in there, bit of a blend. Yeah? Nigel Farage, loves to be seen as man of the people, but very controlling. You do it Nigel's way. Yeah? And supporting Jeremy Corbyn, very team orientated, you know, more interested in those trust aspects of what you do, being fair and reasonable to everybody. So look for it in everything that you do. What are the rules? We know people make their minds up straight away. We've got a whole series of things. What makes them comfortable? I'm not going to talk through each of these, we haven't got the time, but if this information is in your packs. What makes them uncomfortable? How they want to be seen, responsible, valued, trusted, controlling, powerful, competent, active. What they want to know. Take an example. What they want to know, what do others think? Adapting people are very concerned about what everybody else is doing. You know, if they feel that people are happy with the service, they don't want a written case study, they want to go talk to somebody who's experienced it. That's the way to get through to them. A testimonial, not a case study. They love it. When presenting, there's some real rules of engagement when you present. You know, show competitive advantage down here. Do those sorts of things. Yeah? Totally different for the other orientations. So your salespeople can be taught these things. Yeah, what to do. When you negotiate, always with supporting people, give your negotiation position first. They'll want to. It's about trust. It's giving your position first, makes them feel that they trust you. Do it the other way round, they won't trust you, and that trust is vital to them. When closing, conserving people will never be closed quickly. They'll want to think about it. Never try to close them. They'll want to think about it overnight. They'll want to study the detail, give them the time to do it. Conversely, controlling people, give them two options because they need to make the decision. Never give them a single option. So all of these rules of engagement can be learned and taught. So if you don't know your parietal lobe from your prefrontal cortex, get to know it. We can stimulate the things in people's brains by adapting to make them think that we connect better. And actually just by doing it, you will connect better. You'll create better relationships. You can't change your personality. But absolutely, you can change your behavior, and you can do it really effectively when you think about it consciously. So if you just do it intuitively, and let's face it, we all do it intuitively. We all recognize when we connect with somebody, and we all recognize when that's a bit of a struggle and then we're not getting on with somebody. But you can manage your behavior by understanding these things, and you can manage it really effectively to give you that marginal gain, to give you that piece of differentiation which makes a huge amount of difference. By using adaptive selling techniques, we can give off the right signals to make better connections. I've seen it work dozens of times when natural people do it, but everybody can be taught to do it better. So 3 key messages for you. Relationship selling is alive and kicking. It's the biggest tool in your armory for me. And if you can really make it happen and adopt adaptive techniques, you will see the success. There was a study done on use of behavioural profiling with Honda over in Japan, where they took 2 sets of car dealerships. One where they put behavioural profiling in, and another where they did nothing. Same cars, same pricing, similar types of people selling. 35% increase in sales over a 6-month period by making it happen. Now that's one of the biggest advantages. Typical results are anywhere between 10 and 20% when you do this effectively and when you're taught to do it. It's an art under science. Do it naturally, by all means, but scientifically you will understand what you can do. Make it a process. What I find is working with manufacturing and engineering organizations who sell is many times they've taken their engineers into selling because they need to understand the technical knowledge to be able to sell properly. Give them a process and guess what? They love it. They adopt it quicker than anybody else because they want to work with the process. Relationship building is not just an art. It can be a process, it can be a science. So learn to adopt it. Observe, classify, adapt everybody you meet and just see how it works. The slightest things can have the biggest impact, no question. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, the answer is right in front of your face. It's you, and it's the people who work for you that can make the difference. You and your people could be the only differentiator you need. So embrace adaptive selling. You know, this has been around for 40 years, but if you use it as a science, it's hugely powerful. Thank you very much for listening. I'll be delighted to take any questions or comments or any sort of debate in the next few minutes. Anyone? Yes. You'll do with a mic. Yes.
Sort of more basic disc profile. Where do you see the advantages of that over a more traditional disc profile?
Okay. So the question centered around, many of you may be familiar with the Thomas International model, which is disc profiling, which does the same thing in terms of dissect people into 4 orientations and gives them scores in much the same way. For me, it's understanding by putting it on a wheel like the circumplex, you begin to realize the major differences between the two very visually, and recognizing that the diametrically opposite behavior is one that you will naturally struggle with if you adopt a particular preference. So it's about managing that in a more visual way, actually. And a lot of salespeople have that adapting in them, and they like to see things visually. They like to relate to it. So it's about messaging in some ways. But many of the other tools, one of the reasons I use life orientations is that it's taken it into the sales world. So I work with a very highly qualified psychologist, Bridget Bigger, who runs LIFO here in the UK. And I'm not a trained psychologist. I've adopted this and I've got hopefully a good degree of knowledge on it. She provides me with the intellectual insight around the psychology. My experience is 25 years in sales, and I can understand what would work for salespeople, how salespeople think, and how they can use it. Now, I've done many of these workshops with people, and I've done workshops where I train people to present better, to ask better questions, to close better, to negotiate better. I never see my audiences more excited or more enthralled by a topic than when they talk adaptive selling, because they suddenly realize this is something new, this is something different. And they get because most salespeople got into it because they love engaging with people. And if they can do it better, they get very excited by it. I never see a more excited audience. They're so easy to deal with. It's just full of questions, full of comments, etc. Yeah. So I think it's the way the messaging is put across. You know, I'm not saying that what they say is wrong. It's absolutely fine. Yeah. In terms of, you know, 4 orientations, you can, as you think about it, controlling equals dominance, influence equals adapting. They match. It's easy. Anyone else? Yes.
How do you manage, sorry, my name is Animesh.
Yeah.
How do you manage biases or prejudices you may have developed for your colleagues or prospects that you're dealing with?
Sorry?
Or prejudices that you may
Okay.
have developed?
Yeah. The question was around how do you manage some of the biases that people have depending on the people that were working for you. It really is awareness and understanding your own profile first. And what we do is we do a lot of 360 work in teams where you have to actually make the salespeople look in the mirror by getting their colleagues and other people who work with them to tell them what they see in them. And then they suddenly start to understand, actually, I thought I was seen like this and I'm not, I'm seen like that. And the amount of development in their individual perception of themselves is hugely grown. They learn about themselves, but then when they start to get this 360 element, and I've done it with client feedback as well, it's an incredibly powerful and self-awakening moment for them when they start to realize that actually I'm like this, and do I really come across like that? Ouch, I don't like that. And that's the biggest motivation for wanting somebody to change, is when they realize actually they can be using things to excess and actually damaging relationships. So, it's a really useful exercise to do. Yes?
How much in terms of our behaviour is obviously done automatic.
Yeah.
So obviously it's automatic. So what's the best way to actually change your behaviour if you know there's certain aspects of you that are more controlling?
Yeah, the question was how do you tap into that 95% effectively? Because the visual clues in terms of the 5% are obvious for you to see. What they say, what they do, you can actually believe it. But it's really getting into this realm of people watching. So the clue is all about the observation. And what we teach people to do is not to be, I hesitate to call it bland when you first meet somebody, but don't give away your own personality in the first few seconds. Be quite reserved until you assess the people. Now you can learn in advance of the meeting through LinkedIn, through email dialogue, even an email. You just read a few emails from different characters and you'll realize, adapting people are hi there and have a nice weekend and all of that sort of stuff. And conserving people will all be a list of things that you're going to do, a specified agenda. So you can prepare yourself for it, but then it's all about taking in the messaging. It is all about really very, very consciously thinking about all of the clues and signs that you're taking in and to take that in and then reflect on it. And as you progress through the sale, use it more and more. So that first discovery meeting, a lot of it, I'm teaching people not to be too overt until you really understand who you've got in front of you. And only then can you walk back and actually say, well, okay, yeah. And of course, if you've got a team of salespeople doing working together, then people come out with lots of more visual clues in terms of that. We really need to be moving on. If anybody has got questions, I'll take them individually. Or we're over on our stand at 16:32.